Professor Hassan received his Bachelor in Economics and Mathematics from Gustavus Adolphus College, Minnesota, USA, and Master in Economics as well PhD in Finance from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, USA. Professor Hassan is a financial economist with consulting, research, and strategic expertise in development finance, capital markets, Islamic banking, as well as international trade and finance. He has provided consultation to several private companies, the Turkish government, the World Bank, as well as the International Monetary Fund. So without further ado, I would like to turn the microphone over to our speaker for today so he can express his thoughts on today's webinar. So, Professor Dr. Muhammad Kabir Hassan, I will turn the session over to you. Please welcome.
Take some pictures. Partial 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6%. Very easy. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Well, dear audience, very early morning, those who are here in presence as well as on the webinar. So today I'm just going to bring some thoughts, straight thoughts about how do you make economic policy and why it is going wrong. Now let's talk about first the micro foundation of anything that we do. We start from an individual, then aggregate them, and what is the common sense. Now, the new Keynesian theories have neglected macroeconomic foundations, as new Keynesian theories were unable to carefully address shortcomings of inflation and unemployment. Macroeconomics has relied on behavioral economics, and this behavioral economics has become the cornerstone of aggregate economic policy and behavior. According to this idea, fluctuations in domestic and international markets are determined by actions and reactions of consumers, producers, and workers. Unlike macroeconomics, microeconomics does not rely on complex mathematical models. Reliance on macroeconomics or complicated mathematical apparatus makes it difficult for majority of readers to comprehend the theories and practice. So microeconomic foundation or common sense can help us to recognize the individual behavior issue in a macroeconomic theory. If an idea is comprehensible by students, it is most likely to have been derived from microeconomic behavior, not from macroeconomics. Now, what are the common complaints from the students? Well, when I say students, a generic term that also belong to us as lecturers. Macroeconomic texts focus extensively on the technicality of economics, which makes it difficult for students to understand economic concepts. So if you take a graduate level micro class, these are all there. Sometimes I wonder, what is the economics? Or macroeconomics, very complex mathematical model, second generation model, first generation, those type of real business cycle theory, you know what I'm talking about. The distinction between the two is that one leads to a shift of demand curve and the other causes movement along the demand curve. Students are having difficulty comprehending these simple concepts. What is the law of demand and what is the movement along the demand curve? Can somebody tell me what is the difference? The law of demand shows you the relationship between price and quantity, and movement along the demand curve, that means only price parameters will determine what is the quantity consumed or bought or sold. But if you want to see other determinants of demand like income, then you're talking about the shifting of the curve. So these are the simple, logical, simple concept, but we make it very complicated. Now, existing research on micro foundation has been unsuccessful in this front. The discipline is losing popularity among students because of confusing texts which are far away from reality and common sense. And you'll be surprised to know that many business schools in the United States no longer have a major in economics. They dropped it. So the economics is used as a core subject or service course. So you have to take one macro theory, forget about this as a measure. But everything starts from economics. My background is in economics, first degree, second degree. Then I did my PhD in finance because it's easy to do PhD in finance compared to economics. I must admit it myself. Now, then what is the common sense you're talking about? As economic studies human nature, we're dealing with human nature. It's not a mathematical or natural science, it's a chemistry. Probably this is one of the biggest harm that has been done to economic science. The foundation of micro theory by Paul Samuelson. These are all mathematics. And we try to model human behavior in mathematical equation. That is probably a wrong starting point, I believe, for us. Therefore, analysis of few observed phenomena should be enough to explain theories. However, popular ideas are dogmas that are untrue and lacks historical anecdotes. Sometimes people can be very dogmatic. So if you believe in laissez-faire free market economy or supply side economics, your head is stuck in a certain concept and dogma. Economists try to apply theories to exceptional scenarios. Nonetheless, exceptions are less likely to be derived from human nature and common sense. Now, I can give you an example. We can use the Boskin-Feldstein theory to illustrate this argument. So, what does this theory say? It says the low income tax rates on high income offers an incentive to save, work hard, and invest, and this stimulate economic growth. So in the United States, that's why they try to reduce tax rate, but that tax rate disproportionately helps the people of the higher income bracket. So I'm just giving you this theory and see what is the paradox or pitfall of this theory. According to this theory, individual incentive to work derives from the necessities of life: food, clothing, shelter, education, and healthcare. However, it's untrue because only wealthy individuals require tax incentives to maintain their lifestyles. That's not true, right? Everybody, the tax incentive will not change the level of motivation for people belonging to lower socioeconomic status. But it is so. Actually, they need the tax break more than the people on the top. Now, lowering income tax rate for individuals who belong to the top income threshold will lead to regressive taxation. That is happening in the United States to a degree, that is happening in Malaysia too, in many countries. The tax system are regressive, not progressive. This means that government will have to tax more to people who are in the lower income category because you're reading taxes from the high income, so increase the lower. So the Boskin-Feldstein theory is one-sided. When common sense and observed facts disagree with economic theory, econometric models demonstrate the validity of this theory. So we want to start with the theory that you collect data, you try to run every possible combination permutation of econometric method just to show the theory is correct. Econometrics is a useful analytical tool, however, it is subject to misuse, such as in the above case. Now, high growth with high income taxes. Let me bring an economic history from the United States. In the 1950s and 60s, US economic growth was stronger than 1970s. 1980s and 1990s. So these are the golden era of the US economic history. During the former time period, the tax rate for wealthy people was 91%. 91. The income tax rate during the latter period was less than 39%. So if you look at 1990s, income tax has been brought down to 39%. Now, anyone earning more than $200,000 in 1950s or 1960s was paying a tax rate at the rate of 91%, when the effective tax rate was 75%. US national output grew by 40% during the 1950s and by 44% by the 1960s. But what is happening now? In comparison, in the recent decades, 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the national growth rate was 30%, 30%, and less than 20% respectively. So these data is from the economic report of the President of the United States. So it's not with such data, it's the real data. Observed facts blatantly contradict the view that high income taxes hurt economic growth. This is an argument that you keep hearing, right? They said reduce taxes, just going to create incentive to save, that will be invested and so on. But the reality says the other way around. But you still believe in the government, right? Then you have the policy debate, reduce tax, then you make a country more competitive and so on. Econometrics provides researchers with very useful techniques to perform statistical analysis. However, it is important to remember that the methods can be misused. You remember 2 years ago, there were two MIT professors got Nobel Prize in economics by using randomized RCT, randomized control trial method. You know, it's the first time that happened. The person who created this technique wasn't given the Nobel Prize. Those who are using this technique got the Nobel Prize. It's very extremely unusual. Usually, you know, start with the theory leader and then over is following this. So economics prize also has become somewhere to a degree political too. Now this Nobel Prize was given in my area banking. You know, there are three people: Bernanke, Diamond, and what's the other guy? So econometrics is a helpful tool to analyze subtlety in observed data. For example, between 1980s and 1990s, the growth rate increased as the tax rate for the high-income individuals fell. Sorry, the growth rate increased, fell. Econometrics can be used to evaluate the effect of regressive tax during two time periods. Actually, this should be growth rate decrease, not increase. There's a mistake. Now, however, if you compare growth rate during 1950s and 60s, 91% rate versus 39% tax rate tells us the story very successful. So high tax rate, economic growth was high. Low tax rate, economic growth is low. But the theory is telling exactly the opposite way. So we have to rethink, relearn, and retool, bringing common sense in our economic decision making. According to Boskin-Feldstein theory, the economic growth during the 1950s should have been zero, as very high income tax rate would demotivate wealthy individuals to work at all. Rich people would not invest at all, which would lead to more job losses and wage cuts. Without investment and production, everyone should have observed no economic growth. However, the data and facts present completely different results. So dogmas are dangerous. And there are people in economics profession, like every profession, every walk of life, you see the people become very dogmatic. But in economic science, the dogma is not really good. History tells us that dogmas can be disastrous for an economy. During Great Depression that happened in the United States in 1930s, the government failed to rescue depositors and banks. Taxes are increased when demand for goods and services were all-time low. The economy lost billions of people's retirement savings. It is important to recognize the fact that these dogmas were building blocks of the policies at that time. What was the dogma? Lower tax rate is good for the economy. Higher tax rate was bad for the economy. The contemporary economists are ambivalent about government intervention in financial and banking markets. So economists are very rash in decision making. They provided incorrect guidance by advising the government to increase tax rate in order to balance the federal budget. During 1970s, global economy suffered from great inflation. Then we created another dogma or obsession called Phillips curve. It shows the relationship between unemployment and inflation. And this is the policy is being followed in every country. IMF is telling every country you need to increase your interest rate to reduce inflation. Economists advise government to increase money supply to battle recession and decrease interest rate to battle inflation. So, candidness. Economics textbooks are not always candid with the readers. For instance, the real wage of the Americans are declining since 1970s. But few texts recognize this problem and try to provide the reasons and possible solutions. Most of the textbooks either ignores the problem or blame technological advancement. However, technology has been improving the US economy and living standard of Americans up until 1970s. But what happened after 1970s? During 1960s and 50s, economists argued that import or labor-intensive product in the US would be detrimental to real wage. When the forecast became reality, trade theorists disregarded their own hypothesis, blaming the technology for real wage debacle. It is important to admit that globalization has both costs and benefits. Although it increases output and improves economic growth, globalization accelerated income and wealth inequalities. There have been tons of paper written in this area, and if somebody really dig into Malaysian data as well, you follow the export-led economic strategy, globalization, and if you look at economic disparity, labor share, and capital share of income, you see there is a huge discrepancy. Now, inequality and wealth concentration, as I said, since 1970s, income inequality in the US is increasing with the concentration of wealth. This trend accelerated during 2000, which led to severe economic crisis across the region. Currently, only 40% of the American wealth is controlled by 1% of the population. There is a saying that top 8 people in the United States own wealth with more than 67 poor countries in the world. So this concentration of wealth and inequality is a huge problem for the global citizens. US not only the nation suffering from the dilemma, India, China has experienced a massive wealth gap as well. Even though we do not hear about China because of Iron Curtain, the wealth gap is also increasing. There are people, billionaires are coming of China. It's a communist country otherwise. Tax structure since 1950s, again, one more time, taxation has become increasingly repressive in the US. During the 1935 and 70s, area of taxation was very progressive, and majority portion of taxes are paid by rich people. Regressive taxation, on the other hand, is not only prevalent in the US, it has become increasingly popular around the globe as well. Corporate income tax rates have declined, with Social Security and sales tax has increased disproportionately. So you're reducing taxes in the corporation, but you're increasing taxes on individual citizens. So the tax policy has drastically increased the portion of taxation borne by middle class or poor individuals, which class enjoy tax incentives. So there is also regressive interest rates. Interest rate has been made very close to zero, right? Now, in some countries, interest has also become regressive. Greater portion of interest of loan are borne by poor and middle class. In most cases, rich are lenders, not borrowers. However, when do the borrower rich people lower interest rates on their loan payments? So lower interest rate again is indirectly helping the rich class. Again, we also have too many models. You know, those who teach a graduate level macro class, there's so many different types of models that you teach. Actually, we have a PhD program. The PhD students have to take a one macro theory class, and graduate coordinator, everybody complains about this class. They said all we do in class, derive equation, mathematics, then coming to a mathematical solution. They ask, what is the economics that I want to learn? The common sense thing is missing. If you ever open a journal of Economic Theory yet, really you see what is economics. It's a whole bunch of equations one after another. You have to have a working knowledge of PhD in mathematics, to understand those type of literature. So economics theories are inclined to create many new models to answer different questions. For instance, Oaks use one model to explain Great Depression, and then to analyze long-term economic growth, and yet another to evaluate Great Inflation. One model explains formation of bubble, occurrence of Great Depression and Great Deflation during the 1970s. The same model accounts for change in economic growth during the 1980s and the stagflation of real wage after 1970s. So what does it do when you have different models to analyze different phenomena? You do not find a convergence. The holistic picture of the macroeconomic theory is missing. So you really need to come up with some sort of a modeling which everybody understands, which is congruent to the data, consistent data that you observe, and which are useful for policy decision making. Ideological neutrality, tax flows can be biased towards different ideologies. During the 1950s to 70s, tax flows are biased toward Keynesian slant. So, Keynesian, you have the demand management policy, supply management policy, monetary theory, fiscal theory, now, at present, we back to our classic macroeconomics and ideology. Would have covered nothing during crisis, or Keynes would motivate people to take more debt. Actually, what happened during this pandemic is expenditure policy by the government income support is a outgrowth of this Keynesian theory. When demand is low, you have to boost up the demand by using fiscal policy. Or your fiscal policy, you borrow money to dole out to the citizens so that's all. Now, in retrospect or hindsight, that was not a possibility that kept many people alive because the whole country, was in a prison. I mean, the whole world, right? So now the question is, to keep these people alive, that fiscal incentive given in different ways. In Malaysia, you also probably had it. In the United States, we get a big chunk of money from the federal government to keep us alive. But that also created another problem. So now, all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, vaccine was invented in the economy. So people have all this surplus liquidity in their hand. Because even they had money, the supply was constrained because of lockdown. They could not spend it. Now, what they did in this time, they because they cannot start investing in the stock market. You'll be surprised. Stock market was doing great during this pandemic. It's very contradictory. How do you explain it? Because of this extra liquidity that the people pocket start investing in the stock market. Now, do you think that this is some responsibility as an academic economist? Of course. And we are teaching the wrong stuff to students. We are following the wrong stuff. So what are the responsibilities that we have? Let's talk about this now. The global financial crisis has revealed the need to rethink fundamentally how financial systems are regulated. There is a systemic failure of the economics profession. Actual economic models fail to account for actual evolution of the real world economy. Little exploration of early indicators of system crisis and potential ways to prevent this malady from developing, and there is also a systemic failure of economic profession. Implicit behind standard models, market and the contrary, when they get abstract, don't do anything. It's the original situation. Where you foster a systematic because of from we need models capable of emphasizing such exceptional times. All models work in normal time, but the question is, when you rise or using economic policy making, you have models should be capable of predicting unusual circumstances. I'm not talking about the exogenous pandemic. Nobody really could have predicted. But other types of that happens, the endogenous system, our endogenous system, what will be the shock absorbing capacity in the model? Unfortunately, we did not reach that top. Economics and academic discipline stands for the desire to explain phenomena like unemployment, boom and bust cycles. How we don't explores many of the aspects of the economy that lead to crisis. Conflict theoretical models to know that without consideration of such effects might seem contradictory. So everything that we teach what's going to happen normal time. Any macro model that's what we try to discuss. The definition of economics that is concerned with the allocation of scarce resources is short-sighted and it uses economics to the study of optimal decision in the well-specified choice problem. It leads to difficult questions of coordination of and the possibility of poor ineffectiveness. Very often we get this word, supply, has been because lockdown, demand is also, but it's coordinated, should be capable of at least predicting or foreseeing what will be the results of the coordination failure. Economists who develop the theoretical models were aware of the unrealistic restrictions in the public about the fragility of their models. You talk all these good times, okay, normal times was going to happen, but we never really disclosed to the public why I derived at this conclusion because of the assumptions that I made. If the assumptions are not realistic, then whatever you produce, it will just follow as a logical flow. I know there's a philosophical debate, if those who believe in the logical positivism in economics, they think that, what is the ultimate test? The ultimate test of a theory, whether it can withstand the repeated economic testing. So if economic testing fails, then you remodify your model, then you use this model to test the data again, and you keep doing it until so it's an evolutionary process. So they say that assumptions are irrelevant, but we are saying that assumptions are not really irrelevant. So there are a number of possible explanations for this failure to warn the public. Lack of understanding explanation. The researcher did not know the models were fragile, very unlikely. Second one, they did not consider it for their job to warn the public. Misunderstanding of the role of economists, and it involves an ethical background. They said, don't care. All we have to say, I've taught this class textbook solution, I'm telling you. But all these uncertainties, all these peculiarities, all of the exogenous shock that might happen, how the economic system is going to react, they should be able to tell the public accordingly. Economists have an ethical responsibility to communicate the limitations of their models and the potential misuses of their research. Need for ethical code for professional economic scientists. Everybody has a code of ethics, but we don't have a code of ethics. So there is a joke, if you have one problem, if you go to 5 economists, and they'll give you 5 different solutions. But one problem solution should be one, like a doctor, you give this medication in order to solve this problem. Unfortunately, we agree to disagree in the economics profession. Second one, the models or use of models as a source of risk. Economic textbook models applied for allocation of scarce resources are predominantly of the Robinson-Crusoe type. This approach is mingled with insights from Walrasian general equilibrium theory. This theoretical result underlies the belief that introduction of the new classes of derivatives can only be welfare increasing. So there is a well thought out argument in finance. We call this complete market. So in order to complete the market, you encourage innovation. So there the theory says that, primary security. So you should have, let's say you have 10 different states of the world. So if you have 10 primary securities, you can use these primary securities in order to create any sort of combination of payoff. So end result of this dogma, of this conception, is that the innovation is beneficial to the economy. For example, derivative is beneficial. Credit default swap is beneficial according to logical conclusion of this theory. But was credit default swap beneficial for us? Many people say, Warren Buffett said the credit default swap is the financial weapon of mass destruction. And during this 2008 and 9 financial crisis, those who studied this very carefully, what happened, or because of this derivative inclusion or the exponential growth of this instrument in the economy. On the practical side, mathematical portfolio risk management models have been academic backbone of the increase of trading volume and diversification of instruments in financial markets. Derivative products achieve market penetration if a certain industry standard has been established for pricing and risk management of these products. Mostly pricing principles are derived from a set of assumptions on an appropriate process for the underlying asset. Hedging the inherent risk of a derivative position by balancing with other assets that neutralize the risk exposure, and the most prominent example is certainly the development of a theory of option pricing model, and that really regulation has entered derivatives market. And if you look at the derivatives market, there was a one study done. The financialization of the economy is about 200-300 times bigger than the real economy. So the financialization is cause of that ups and downs and business cycle that we observe in the economy. Now, according to the theory, financialization is supposed to be good. Yesterday, I talked about Hyman Minsky's theory. You need credit. Productive credit is good for the economy, but the Ponzi or speculative credit is bad for the economy. Now, what is the productive credit? That the economy is growing, let's say 10%, you need the credit growth to be 10%. But the economy is growing at 5% and you create more credit, speculation, or Ponzi scheme credit, that's going to lead to high inflation without any change in the economic growth of the economy. Things happen. We talked about these unrealistic model assumptions. So sometimes the model can itself become a source of risk. There are additional aspects as well, following the argument from the previous slide. Asset pricing and risk management tools are developed from an individualistic perspective, taking as given the behavior of the market participants. So there is also the danger of control illusion, tendency to conceal the weakness of models and assumptions to those who have not developed them and do not know the potential weaknesses of the assumptions. The increased sophistication of the extent model does not overcome the robustness problem. They should not absolve the modelers from explaining the limitation to the users. Market participants and regulators have to become more sensitive towards the potential weaknesses of the risk management tools. Now, many economic models are built upon the two assumptions of rational expectations and a representative agent. And this is very common in macro modeling. Rational expectations forces individuals' expectations into harmony with the structure of the economist's own model. Rational expectation models are typically found to have dynamics. They are not smooth enough to fit economic data well. They are often framed as dynamic programming problems in macroeconomics which have serious limitations. Researchers assume representative agents and rational expectations and presume that there is a single model of the economy. Now, the major problem is that this approach is not based on and confirmed by empirical research. The cornerstones of many models in finance and macroeconomics are rather maintained despite all contradictory evidence discovered in empirical research. As a modeling experiment, internal consistency must be complemented with external consistency with the data. Economic model has to be compatible with insights from other branches of science on human behavior. Sometimes we make economics divert from all other sciences. A person as a living individual society is not only motivated by demand supply, the price mechanism, there are other things, the culture plays a role, your faith and system plays a role. So what works in the United States may not work in Malaysian context, even though both countries, they say, follow a market economy. With the demand condition, what controls the demand factors, supply factors will be affected differently. It's not working. Okay. So now the major problem is the approach that is not based on confirmed by empirical research. The cornerstones of many models in finance and macroeconomics are maintained despite all contradictory evidence discovered in empirical research. As a modeling requirement, internal consistency must be complemented with external consistency. Economic modeling has to be compatible with insights from other branches of science on human behavior. Let me give an example. 30 plus years ago, when I was a PhD student, it's called efficient market hypothesis in finance was in vogue. Any research that you do, any data that you analyze, data must speak in favor of efficient market hypothesis. Even though the data are otherwise say different. If you want to publish this paper, you have to beat the data enough so that it has the story of efficient market hypothesis. So, challenging a dogma has become a big problem. Those who are who want to research, and you find a contrary result, there is no room for your paper for any government, because it has to tell the story of the ruling government. And that is a big problem. So we have to really put our we have to use our comments to make it more benefit of the people, and because the representative aspect of models is another problem. Means the model are the most extreme form of conceptual reductionism. So everyone here on this room is the same. They're the same. Rights. But it's not true. You have different taste, thought process, and so on. By assumption, all concepts applicable to the macro science spheres are reduced to concepts and knowledge for the lower level domain of individual agent. Quite to the contrary, the representative agent approach in economics has simply set the macro sphere equal to microsphere of all aspects. So this concept reductionism paradigm blocks outset any understanding of the interplay between micro and macro levels. Now, economists have to rethink the concept of macro foundations of macroeconomic models to develop models that allow us to reduce macro events from microeconomic regularities. Since economic is of an essentially interactive nature, economists micro foundations to allow for interactions of So most of what is relevant in economic life has to do with interaction. The methodological preferences indicate macroeconomic analysis, preventing it from approaching the topics. A change of focus is necessary to seriously the irregularities in the expectation formation revealed by behavioral research. It gives back an independent role to expectations and economic models. Again, don't take behavioral economics has become a new paradigm. So, in the history of economic thought or history of ideas, one idea prevails for 20, 30 years, then it dies out, another idea comes in. Now we come up with ideas, and that is very normal because we are changing. So change is a constant that we deal with. And if we find a new model that really explains the data better, we should really expect that. We should accept that data. Currently, popular models, empirical purpose is far from satisfactory. So when we talk about the robustness and data-driven empirical research, all academicians, our students, PhD students, we deal with data, we summarize, we try to fit the data, restore it. That empirical data-driven approach is also a problem. That I'm afraid econometrics that we teach to our students in economics, and 20, 30 years down the line, econometrics will become obsolete. Because of the technological breakthrough, data science and data analysis, you can just really choose better data analysis. So I'm afraid 20, 30 years down the line, the data research generative. And the technological breakthrough is there, how to analyze the data. So the classical, the way, this panel data method or time series analysis is losing its validity slowly. Now, calibration is another one. So you do have mathematical model, then you calibrate. But the calibrate, when you do this, is done using deep economic parameters. Micro parameters cannot be used directly in the parameterization of a macroeconomic model. Another concern is non-stationarity and structural shifts in the underlying data. Macro models are often calibrated over a long time horizon, include major changes in the regulatory framework of the countries investigated. Now, the current approach of using pre-selected model is problematic. It is recommended a more data-driven methodology. That's why the other types of methodological inquiries are being taught in graduate schools in the West. Key features of data should be explored by data analytical tools in a specific case. Co-integrated VAR models could provide an avenue towards identification of robust structure within a set of data. The general to specific empirical approach has a good chance of nesting a multivariate, path-dependent data generating process and relevant dynamic macroeconomic theories. So what should be the ethical responsibility of the researcher? The economic policy model should be theoretically and empirically sound. Now, number 5, a research agenda to cope with financial fragility. And it is a big buzzword nowadays, financial stability, fragility. The notion of financial fragility implies that the given system might be more or less susceptible to produce crisis. Financial innovations have made the system more fragile. A more highly connected system might be more efficient in coping with certain tasks, but will be more vulnerable to shocks and systemic failure. So the introduction of new derivatives, more contingent, equal higher efficiency. However, great efficiency gains to derivatives are merely a theoretical implication. A coordinated area is a vehicle connected interconnected system. Necessity for supervised to develop a perspective of the network perspective financial system, connected appropriate data define measures of activity and perform back testing. So there is an inconsistent regulation has to be extended from system. Regulation has to have effective have to be respected by more traditional approaches. The investigation of the informational role of financial crises and financial contracts has to be done. Centralized information processing instead of the dispersed one in traditional credit relationship might lead to severe loss of information. On the macroeconomic level, it would be desirable to develop early warning system that indicate the formation of bubbles. Combinations of indicators with time series techniques could be helpful in detecting deviations of financial or other prices from their long-run averages. So, what is our liability as a professional or academic economist? The current crisis might be characterized as an example of the final stage of a well-known boom and bust pattern that has been repeated so many times in the course of economic history. So 2008 and 9, that crisis that happened, that was not new. This type of crisis we can observe in the history of the media. We have food mania, then other types, and then we have South Sea bubble mania. So there are different types of in history that exist. There are aspects that make the crisis different from the predecessors. The President Bone has already the development of new financial products that open up new investment opportunities, but the global dimension of the crisis of 2009 is due to increased connectivity of our already highly interconnected financial system. Both aspects have been largely ignored by academic economics. So, let me show you a couple of examples. We talked about your understanding. Now, I want to give you an example. Recently, tried policy. You know, the rest of the interest rate of the inflation partly reduce the interest rate, even the interest going up. And what is the policy? Even so let me give you the example. Now, contrary to the general accepted view, after Abdul's election as president, and he is repeatedly saying interest is not a result but cause of inflation. The basic truth of policy has been stated by President Erdogan that inflation is a high interest rate, not the cause. According to this policy, inflation decreased by decreasing, and this is probably what we each consume what is the now, no, we're not going to follow that. So in order to fight economic recession, you reduce interest rate. So this cycle continues. Again, you start this cycle back and forth. Now that does not solve the problem completely. So we need a policy that's going to take us out of this boom and bust cycle. So we need to have a policy that's going to be consistent with the economic growth of the economy. So what was it? The economic policy of the Turkish government growth strategy through investment, employment, production, export, and current account surplus. The sine qua non of this policy is to increase investment. Inflation is taken as a problem but it is not seen as a main problem of the economy. President Erdogan stated that if it were the main problem, the Turkish economy had accomplished sustainable economic growth because for a reasonable period of time, inflation rate in Turkey was less than 10%. Just to give you an anecdote, when President Erdogan took power in 2003 as the prime minister, inflation was like in 70%. Then he took a policy, same policy. Instead of increasing interest rate, he focused on investment. So in order to focus on investment, you need to make the investment cost of making investment lower. So he reduced interest rate and he was able to arrest the inflation and brought it down below 10% with the subsequent growth rate of the economy. So what we did, we take the 2 years of data. We have shown the first 10 years when it's on power, when this policy worked, there was an inverse relationship between the interest rate and investment. It is clearly seen the interest rate investment relationship has worked very well between 2004 and 2010. Investment has accompanied to decrease the interest rate. So there is an inverse relationship. But what happened in the recent time? On the other hand, if you look at 2011, 2021, the relationship ran more like flat. So interest rate is not really leading to more investment. Now the question is, what is the difference between the previous 10-year period and current 10-year period? What happened during this time period? There was crisis, Syrian crisis, then there was COVID, and recently Russian and Ukraine war. So we are going through, or the Turkey, the entire world is going through different time period. Turkey, because of proximity of the Syrian, the ISIS crisis has ravaged the whole world for 10 years, right? And Turkey took the brunt of this, or majority, the impetus of this war that happened in this Middle East area. Now, do you know that Turkey has a 3.5 million refugees? It is 3.5 million refugees compared to the rest of the world. Europe doesn't want to. Europe said that they're going to take some refugees, but that was only promise. They really never took the refugees. So all this extra burden was coming to Turkish economy, but still they're standing still. And during this Donald Trump time, it also purposefully was trying to harm the Turkish economy. So if we do not see this connection, inverse relationship between interest rate and investment, because of all these things happened during the second 10-year period. Now, why President Erdogan so much against increasing interest rate? Increasing interest rate decreases the production, and in his own sentences, millions are left without work and without food, whose hopes have been eroded and their future darkened due to the decrease in production. Increasing interest rate increases the income of a few facts of the land. We made our choice not for those who are rubbing their hands to rob the country once again with the pressure to raise the interest rate, but for the millions of the people whose jobs, lives, and livelihoods we provide by preserving employment. So his idea have more investment, more production, more employment, more money in the hands of the people, economic growth. You sell products to outside, there will be current account surplus, and that current account surplus is going to tame inflation, is going to bring stability in the currency market. Now, right now, what is happening in the world, the example that I'm giving you, it is also to a degree to many countries. We have a strong US economy, US dollar, and if you look at the Turkish economy, what is the US monetary policy? Those who read financial press, US Central Bank or the Federal Reserve had increased interest rate in many 5 times 75 basis points. Now this base rate is about 3.5% from 0% over the last 12 months time period. So US monetary policy, there is no way but to solve inflation. So US central bank is very high on taming inflation. Inflation threatens the reserve currency power of the US dollar. So there is another motivation why US wants to bring the inflation down, because if inflation increases, it erodes the purchasing power of currency. So United States wants to maintain the stability or value of the currency so that the rest of the world accept this as a reserve currency. You know that yesterday I told 80% of the world trade is done through dollar. So even Malaysia wants to buy something from China, you simply cannot pay Malaysian ringgit to China's yuan. You have to convert this into dollar first and this trade. So translation, those who teach international finance will lose value right there where fairness. But the West and the economic system, financial system is created that way. Even US threatens if somebody who doesn't want to use their currency to this trade. Now, increase interest rate to decrease inflation, then stronger dollar is not good for overall economy, but inevitable to preserve dollar's reserve currency position at high inflation. What is happening with Turkey? Now, there is no way but to increase GDP and employment. So for Turkey, their main concern is not inflation. Their main concern is to maintain the economic growth and employment. They want to keep people employed, because if a person is employed, instead of 2 meals, at least you will eat 1 meal rather than going hungry. So focus is totally different. Decrease interest rate. So because of you want to increase GDP and employment, you decrease interest rate to increase investment. So as a result, of course, you have a weak Turkish lira. It's politically and economically dangerous. It's not good for any country, but not as dangerous as GDP increase as it is expected to serve for current account surplus. So if you have more export, if you have more production, that's going to generate current account surplus, and that will bring stabilization for the Turkish currency. Now, in the near future, so you have strong dollar, weak Turkish lira, and that will eat the economic growth for Turkey. And I have explained the reasoning and the channel through which is going to happen. In the near future, it appears there is no comeback in monetary policies, neither for US nor for Turkey. The strong dollar policy is complementary for Turkey aim of economic growth through current account surplus, despite the fact that current policies will worsen inflation problem even further in Turkey. It seems like that high inflation is intentionally faced up by the Turkey, and those prior policies might be in favor of Turkey in terms of providing economic growth in 2013. Now, in order to solve this problem, the Turkey has another problem. Majority of their loans are denominated foreign asset. So they want to use the Turkish lira as a currency of their exchange mechanism. High dollarization increases sensitivity of the economy in terms of currency fluctuation. Need of tightening response to alleviate the pressure on exchange rates. In a high current account deficit economy, monetary tightening reduces the deficit only in the short run, which leads to temporary decline in inflation, but resumption of the economic potential growth, unsustainable inflation and deficit in the long run. So you need for a premature and inefficient tightening in monetary policy. So this is what he is arguing against. If they follow this short run, you have a reduction in inflation, then you resume it, and then you have unstable inflation and deficit in the long run. So he wants to get out of this premature inefficient tightening in the monetary policy. So how he wants to do this? High dollarization weighs on both magnitude of exchange rate shocks and exchange rate pass-through to inflation. For these reasons, eliminated dollarization was defined as the main aim of the liralization strategy of both Turkish central bank and all stakeholder institutions. So how they want to do this? The liralization refers to a macro process that is managed in an integrated policy framework in order to ensure that the main store of value in the financial system will be Turkish lira-denominated asset. The weight of Turkish lira-denominated in all balance sheet will increase significantly. Overwhelmingly fixed income Turkish lira-denominated asset will be used in the central bank's Turkish funding as collateral, and Turkish lira will be the only medium of exchange in domestic commercial transactions. So the liralization policy increased the weight of Turkish denominated asset, and financial system in its entirety will become Turkish lira denominated weighted. So that is the policy the Turkish government is following. The conclusion ultimately, and actually I support this, I was in Turkey about 2 weeks ago. The President Erdogan called about 20 economists from all over the world to discuss his economic policy. So everybody spoke their mind. But I support this heterodox policy because everything else failed. In the United States in the last 60 years, say you increase interest rate to reduce inflation, but at the expense of recession. And you need to get out of this bad cycle. And how do you do this? Try something new and see what is happening. In Turkey, first out of 20 times, the first 10 years it worked very well. And the second 10, it is not working because of the other exogenous factors that I just mentioned. But you need to stick to your policy to see, to find it, to get to a logical end. Now, let me give you another of this economic policy making, how we explain the stock market bubbles and crashes. I told you, the whole economy came to a standstill, and the stock market was just rising. How to explain it? It's very irrational. The whole economy is suffering, the corporations are suffering, but the stock price is going up. So here I want to share an analysis by an economist, which I revere very highly, Robbie Botro, 2008 and 9 financial crisis. He predicted very well. He wrote a new book called Common Sense Macroeconomics. And he comes up with one model that tries to solve this problem. And I just want to go through these basic ingredients of his model in layman's terms. So first thing, what is the bubble? And we see a bubble in the stock market, we see a bubble in the real estate market, in everywhere. When the law of demand for assets breaks down completely, a speculative bubble is born. People do not like to buy goods when they are pricey, but in an environment surrounding bubbles, they purchase assets simply because their prices have already served, are expected to serve more. Now, central to this bubble economy is the concept of wages and productivity. In all models, it is assumed that the real wage equals the marginal product of labor. That is according to labor theory, which in turn is linked to its average product or labor productivity or demand for labor. Data showed that a positive relationship between real wage and productivity. However, there are times when strong positive relationship between real wage and productivity breaks down. Whenever this happens, it is followed by a devastating crash. Whenever the real wage trades productivity, we call a wage gap develops in the economy, means the more and more of the economic fruit are going to the capital rather than to the labor. So this is the equation Robbie Botro uses: wage gap, labor productivity, or real wage. If it is greater than or equal to 1, means wage gap is increasing. The wage gap grows if productivity grows faster than the real wage, and falls in the opposite case. When wages just keep up with productivity, the gap remains constant. So I want to show you some figures, and these are from the US data. Look on the left-hand side. So this is the stock market. Stock market is linearly growing and is corollary to the wage gap trend. So when the wage gap or inequality increases, stock market does more. Same story in the next time period, in the most recent time, 1980 to 2019. Look at the stock market is going up, and the wage gap is also linearly increasing, or inequality increasing in the labor market. So the model he tries to develop, because the centrality of the labor market explains everything. How is the wage productivity gap related to macroeconomy? How are aggregate supply and aggregate demand linked to the workforce? Wages are the main source of demand. So you work, you get your wage income, and that creates the demand for goods and services. Productivity is the main source of supply. The more productive, the more goods will be produced. And if the two are not synchronized with each other, aggregate supply and demand cannot be in equilibrium for long, and eventually the economy runs into many hurdles. Whenever any country or region suffers a deep recession, there is a persistent wage productivity gap. Number 4, the wage gap. Two popular theories of unemployment, classical and Keynesian, but both have shortcomings. In the classical model, job losses occur if the real wage is too high, because you do not have any, or above the minimum wage, there is a additional excess supply, so that if wages fall, the problem would vanish. So that's why in the United States, the Republicans are against minimum wage. So if you do this, that does not really clear the market, that ultimately hurts the poor people. That is their argument. In the Keynesian model, on the other hand, unemployment arises from the deficiency of the demand related to supply. However, the theory of wage gap explains what classical and Keynesian theories do not. So, example, let us suppose General Motors builds 50 cars and puts them up for sale. If only 45 are sold, then GM is stuck with 5 unsold autos, and it lays off some workers to keep profits high. In other words, if a farm does not sell all it has produced, it has to fire some workers and they produce whatever it can sell. Now, if you extend this theory to the macroeconomy, economic equilibrium requires that supply equals demand. Supply is simply GDP, that is the value of the nation's output in a year. Demand, the consumer spending on domestic goods plus investment from a pure macro relationship. Assume that there is no borrowing and the government has no budget deficit. Suppose, using some number, supply and current prices is $2,000. Consumer demand or spending is 1,500 plus investment equal 500. So the demand is 15 plus 5 and 2,000. Supply is 2,000. Hence, the economy is in equilibrium because 200, 2,000, and 2,000 when the supply equals demand, so that there are no layoffs. Now, let the wage rate fall down. The classical model will say what? That consumer spending will also fall because people's salary is a major determinant of the spending. Let's say it falls by 300. So now the demand, the original investment 500 same, demand is 1,200 instead of 1,500. Now 1,700 is less than the economic potential or potential GDP of 2,000 of the economy. In that case, what happens? Since supply exceeds demand, 2,000 is greater than 1,700, there will be layoffs and investment will also decline because of decreasing consumer spending, and more layoffs will follow. Now the theory is flawed. Instead of solving the problem of job losses, it makes it worse, according to this classical theory. Now the Keynesian theory is valid, but it fails to explain why demand may be deficient for as it did during the Great Depression. You know, the Great Depression lasted from 6 to 7 years, the longest one, very severe. Now, the Keynesian model, this Keynesian model also did why this market did not clear over a long period of time. So, how do you explain this thing in a general model? So, explain this idea to the macroeconomy. The theory of wage gap, as I said before, when the real wage is a purchasing power of income and productivity is output per employee, if productivity grows faster than the real wage, the wage gap goes up. So let's go back to the example again. Let's say productivity rises by 10%. Then at current prices, supply also rises by 10%, which is down 2,000 times 1.2 is 2,200. If the wage rate is constant, consumer spending and demand stay constant as well. After the productivity rise, supply is 2,200, demand is 2,000. Again, overproduction and hence layoff. So if you have overproduction, you have to sell it, you have to, cut the employment. So real cause of unemployment now is apparent. Whenever the wage gap grows, layoffs become certain. This is because productivity is the main source of supply and wages the main source of demand. And if productivity outpaces wages, supply outpaces demand, and there will be layoff and unemployment in the economy. Again, coming back to wage gap, the outcome of the wage gap model does not depend on what happens to prices, which will drop as output rises, and the increase in value of production will be less than 10%. If the prices were to drop, then there would be massive unemployment as happening during the Great Depression, because sinking prices demolish profits and lead to widespread job losses. Furthermore, prices may not fall at all if total demand rises to the level of enhanced supply because of society's borrowing. The idea explains why demand may stay deficient relative to supply for a long time. If productivity keeps rising and wages remain still, the supply is greater than demand, so that there are persistent layoffs. And until the wage gap closes, unemployment poverty will stay the same. Now you bring budget deficit in order to plug the gap. And how does it work? Why? The rising wage gap also generates permanent budget deficits. How much budget deficit is required to avoid layoffs? The supply is 2,200, the demand 2,000. Then there are $200 worth of unsold goods. The absence of consumer borrowing, the budget deficit must be equal to the value of the unsold goods of 200 to close the supply-demand gap. If the budget deficit cannot rise to this level, then you will allow consumer borrowing needed to preserve this economic balance. So what it means, the value of unsold goods equals budget deficit, consumer borrowing. So let's put some number. So the value of unsold goods is 200, budget deficit is 100 by the government, and another 100 by the consumer spending. Whenever the wage gap goes up, either there are layoffs or debt must rise at the consumer and or the government level to avoid job losses. If productivity continues to rise and wages remain sluggish, then consumer government debt will have to keep rising to avoid low layoffs. Now the question is going to ask, if productivity continues to rise and wages remain sluggish, so where does this extra fruit goes to? This extra economic or growth or the benefit goes to the capital providers, and the workers are getting less and less. So the way that's what the root or the cause of all this economic inequality we see in the market. So that leads to concentration of wealth. There are two possibilities. One, where the government faces a threat of layoffs, and the other where some workers have been already fired. In the absence of layoff, the deficit simply raises profit without benefiting the workers. When productivity and output rise by 10%, business revenue also increases 10%, and if wages and hence consumer demand remain still, there is a potential for layoff, which are abated by the existence of the deficit. The way the rate of employment and people's income stay the same, all that happens is a rise in the business revenue of 10% and the increase in profit. And in the absence of unemployment, the fruit of the budget deficit goes entirely to the companies with no benefit to the workers. In the case of government raises its deficit to tackle increasing layoffs, some workers are indeed called back to work, but usually at lower wages. Hence, the workers do benefit some from official policy, but this case also profit rise further because of this lower wage cost to employees, and the fruit of this deficit goes mostly to the producers. And who are the producers? They are the capital providers. Now, that leads to macroequilibrium and monopoly capitalism. Monopoly capitalism is a system dominated by giant firms that charge high prices, pay low wages, and extract huge productivity from employees. High productivity generates high production or supply, whereas low wages create low demand. With supply constantly exceeding demand, there is overproduction that leads to layoff. The real reason for high unemployment or sluggish economy is a persistent rise in the wage productivity gap generated by monopoly capitalism. So the politicians have two choices: follow policies that raise wages to the level of growing productivity, or do something else that raises demand to the level of supply. Policymakers are unwilling to raise minimum wage regularly. However, they adopt debt-generating policies. And what is the debt-generating policies? Ever since in the United States context, 1980s, the Fed has lowered interest rate to pull people more into debt. So the consumers raise their spending not out of a wage rise, but out of increased borrowing. Federal deficits and debt have also risen for the same reason. And if you look in the United States, we have twin deficit, federal budget deficit increasing every year, both internal and external balance. This way, the demand increases artificially to match ever-growing supply. So macroequilibrium was defined by aggregate supply, in aggregate by the demand and supply, but now it is defined by supply because demand plus new debt. So where new debt reflects society's total borrowing that equals excess supply over demand, now new debt has become a part of the new equilibrium because automatic stabilizers raise government spending. The government follows expansionary fiscal monetary policies to raise total spending whenever it falls short of the supply of goods and services, and the government action is now become a part of the equilibrium. So it looks like this. If you want to show this, now this macroeconomic, so you have the supply, you have the demand, plus you have the new debt. If productivity rises every year and wages remain still, then supply is greater than demand every year. Debt must rise every year to create equilibrium. Since productivity grows exponentially, then debt must also grow exponentially. 2019 economic report of the President of the United States, productivity more than doubled between 1980 and 2018, while the real wage remained constant. Since wage income is the main source of demand, supply rose much faster than demand, and to raise spending to the level of supply, both consumer and federal debt rose to all-time high. So this is the root cause of the inequality, concentration of wealth into the economy. So debt and inequality, all production is divided between capital income and labor income. So profit equals GDP minus wages. However, if some goods are unsold, then profit becomes GDP minus wages unsold goods. Because the value of unsold goods lowers the real value of profit dollar for dollar, through debt creating policies, politicians ensure that consumers and the government borrow enough money to eliminate overproduction. So the consumer borrowing plus government budget deficit equals to unsold goods. Debt creation means unsold goods become zero. This way profits rise by the amount of the borrowing in the economy. And who gets this? The benefit goes to the capital providers. Thus, debt generating policies make the super rich richer. Now, rocketing profit and stock prices. We have already seen that when debt rises to maintain the demand supply equilibrium, profit must rise sharply. Herein lies the seed for the stock market bubble. Share prices depend primarily on profits. When profit rise, stock market also rises. Some companies pay an adequate dividend to the shareholders, others pay nothing, but invest back much of their profit back into the business expansion and then grow exponentially. When the wage gap and debt grow, company profit rise sharply, so does the share market. And this is the reason why you see the share market is increasing, even though the economy is stagnant. When the wage gap is constant, the share market will double within the doubling of profit. When some other things change, the stock market escalation can be even sharper. So another factor that stimulates the share price is the fall in the interest rate resulting from the rising wage gap. When the government lowers interest rate fee to push the public into increased debt, assets that compete with stocks lose some of their attraction. The public pulls its savings into a variety of assets, stocks, bonds, gold, real estate, and so on. Bonds and shares are very competitive with each other. When the rate of interest falls, the bonds become less attractive, so more funds flow into the share market. So this is another way through which the rising wage gap was the stock market bubble, because the gap forces the government to bring interest rate down in order to eliminate the shortfall in aggregate demand. Share price outperform or even profit in the wake of a rising wage gap. So we got into a bubble economy. A bubble economy is born when collectively debt, business investment, business mergers, share prices appear to flout all forms of rationality. Speculation booms as public and financial institutions rush to acquire various assets at overpriced prices. The law of demand regarding the purchase of assets break down. Normally, people buy less of anything as its price rises. However, the opposite happens in a bubble economy. As people buy more of some assets as their prices go up, the wage gap and debt continue to rise. A bubble economy is a predictable result. But it cannot continue like this. Then we have this inevitable crash. The speculative bubble is supported by an ever-rising debt, and common sense tells us that the debt cannot rise forever. There is an upper limit. When the public is up to its neck in loans, the financial institutions simply slow their lending for fear of default by the borrowers. The government can perhaps borrow money indefinitely, but the public cannot, because people run out of good collateral and banks reduce the prices. The supply becomes greater than demand, and the profit crash along the share market. Those who few sell their shares at the time indeed become millionaires and billionaires overnight. But if everyone tries to cash out, the stock market will indeed crash. Companies begin to fail, some file for bankruptcy, and credit growth slows down. This is the beginning of a chain reaction that disentangles the bubble economy. Now, the rising wage gap feeds profits on one side and debt on the other. First, the stock market moves sideways, but as excess supply of goods continues, share prices begin to crash. Most of the investors then head for the exit. Some suffer from real losses, others lose their savings and the retirement money. What really matters is the size of the wage gap. If the wage gap rises, the rest follows as a matter of cause and effect. When the wage gap remained constant, as in the 1960s in the US economy, economic growth was stronger than ever. Yet there was no speculative bubble, no crash in the US economy. Now the question is, what are the reasons for rising wage gap? I explained one reason. Anything that generates decline in labor demand with a rise in labor supply produces a rise in the wage gap. So one of the reasons is taxation. Regressive taxation, we call the supply side. Rising tax burden along with declining rural wage that reduces them to increase the labor supply. Then you have the monopolistic competition, the demand side. The producers have the capacity to control their prices by controlling their output. They reduce their output and employment and raise their prices. The result is a lower real wage and higher wage gap. When competition declines, what happens? The profit maximizing firm hire workers until the money wage is equal to the marginal revenue product of labor. So what is the marginal revenue product of labor? It's a marginal revenue times marginal productive labor, where the marginal revenue is less than the price level. Since each extra unit of output is sold at a lower price, marginal revenue of a monopolistic competitive producer decreases with expanding sales. Now, for a competitive producer, price is constant, is the price taker. Its marginal revenue is also constant and exceeds the decreasing marginal revenue of the firm facing monopolistic competition. So dividing both sides by the price level, so you do nominal wage over price, so marginal productive labor, and this, the real wage is equals M times MPL. Now, if you look at M is what? Marginal revenue over price is a fraction of the is a fraction that equals to monopoly markup. Under perfect competition, this one is 1, M equals 1. So there is no wage gap. The real wage equals marginal productivity labor. It then follows that the monopolistic real wage is a fraction of the competitive real wage. As a result, the wage gap goes up when competition declines. So first was the taxation for the reason of this wage gap. Second was monopolistic competition because they have control over the prices. And the third one is declining power of the labor union in the United States. When unions lose their influence, the real wage declines in the entire economy and generates a rise in the wage gap. I do not know what is the union power in the Malaysia, but the United States, for the last 30, 40 years I've been there, the power is declining. Number 4, free trade. According to the trade theory literature, globalization tends to raise a country's output and its average productivity of labor, but at the same time, its real wage falls if it imports labor-intensive products. Rising import creates jobs in import competing industries, whereas rising exports produce job gains in exporting industries. With the fall in labor demand comes a fall in the real wage, while the overall productivity of the nation rises with increasing trade, but the wage gap must rise at the same time. Number 5, declining minimum wage. The minimum wage in the United States 2019 was $7.25 and had remained constant since 1997. The corresponding wage in the 1960s was $11 in terms of today's price. The average US wage is far above the minimum. How does the minimum wage then affect the average salary? It serves as a benchmark for the salaries of the production worker. Both the employer and employee look at the minimum wage and add a skill premium. When the benchmark declines, naturally production workers experience a drop in the purchasing power of their pay and the wage gap rises. So, my dear friends, this is the explanation. So I started with the economic policy making, then I talked about the modeling that we do, the assumption that we make, we test our model, the data, we talked about how we can solve this problem and our liability, ethical liabilities in a professional economist. Then I brought 2 examples, one from Turkey, heterodox policy, where everybody is saying rising interest rate is going to take inflation, but they are following exactly the opposite policy, and the economy is growing this year is 7.5%, higher than any other country, and the projection of 2023 is even higher. And then finally, I come up with following Robbie Botros, the wage gap, the hypothesis, to come up with a theory or a model to explain what is happening to the stock market, why the wage gap is increasing, the distribution of wealth among different sectors of the economy. Ultimately, when there is a dissension, or is a tension, or is inequality, that generates also supporting performance. There is a revolution, and we have seen this is always happening. So I hope my presentation does show you some light, and you benefited from it a little bit. Okay, so these are some directions. Well, that's a one step at a time. You know, in Turkey, very interesting. Turkey is a very well diversified economy. I just came to know because of my presentation of the President Erdogan. 78% their export or manufacturing export is 78%. They export about 4,300 different types of products to over 200 countries. So it is not concentrated in few, and the top three exporters are not more than 3% of the total export. So very well diversified balance. And what happened, Turkey has also taken the opportunity of the lockdown in China. You know, China is a super supply center of the world. Because it was not produced in Turkey, got the opportunity and started, picking up some. You need to really export more high value added items. That means there has to be the export items where the technology impact is higher. One comparison that I did because of my presentation, South Korea, over the last 30 years, their value addition of their export, the technology component is 20%, whereas in Turkey is only 3%. So sooner or later, we call this middle income trap country. If you want to move up to the next level, you really want to increase the value addition, technology, that part higher into your export base.
What is this theory if we want to apply, for example, the case of Britain, where the British Prime Minister distrust, I think they are willing to minimize improve the
Taxes.
gaps by reducing tax. So you see what happened to the economy collapse. So
They are again flawed policy. They believe that reducing taxes is going to be, rising tide lifts the boat. So there will be more investment because who invests? The rich people, right? Their argument, because if they reduce taxes, there will be more money they will flow into the economy. So idea is again evolving around helping that class really. And they'll be the biggest beneficiary from this low tax policy. Exactly, progressive taxation. Yeah. Exactly. Progressive taxation. You make more money, you pay more taxes. You make less money, you pay less taxes. But they want to do exactly the opposite. They want to reduce tax for the people who make more money, but you need to have a certain amount of tax revenue. So who bears the crux of the tax? The lower income people. It is true, even from the data, it shows that low and medium income people disproportionately bear the higher percentage of total tax revenue in the country. Even in Malaysia too, somebody wants to do this research, you'll find exactly the same thing. Yeah. Right, right. So as I said, the wages create your demand because that's your productivity creates the supply. Yeah, I'm not really denying this basic framework. I'm using demand supply framework, but I'm trying to inject the wage gap as the primary motivator. Why? Or that assumption or that analytical tool helps me explain why there is a rising debt, why there is an inequality, why there is a concentration of wealth is happening, and what are the corollary reasons why this wage gap remains constant or increasing. Inequality is increasing. 40% of the total wealth of the world is owned by only 1%. How do you explain it? It's not even market economy, it's not even communist economy. Even China, inequality is increasing, even though it's a communist country.
China is a unique myself. China was a thing
No, actually, China, one thing we are ignoring, while we then to overlook. China has really achieved remarkable economic achievement over the last 7 years compared to the United States. China has lifted up the bottom 50% income go to the higher level of income level. If you compare this with the United States, we have not changed a lot. Those below 5 years at the lower bottom, they're still the lower bottom. So in this sense, China has the policy they have followed because of communist or whatever policy that will help people to eat out from the poverty level. But at the same time, it is also creating the concentration of wealth. We have the Jack Ma, Alibaba. It's not only there are billionaires and billionaires of Chinese people because their policy, the policy will be Communist Party, but let the market determine with the oversight of the Communist Party. But with the oversight, then you have to pay the return on role. You do not let the market pay the role. So you make some people rich, some people poor.
This was initial. Now I see why the stock market is in what's down. I think this is how the family to the money. Stock levels go up and they create derivative go down, of which they also get money when the stock crash. So I think this is how it looks like.
So one of the things I also like to teach in finance class, the stock market is the barometer of economic growth. But it is not really. No connection. I just told you no connection. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. Just observe the data. How can you explain the stock market is growing? Stock prices, the index is growing when the whole economy is locked down. There is no activity. You cannot explain. This is the reason. Okay. Thank you very much. So, is there another question?
Yeah, that's right.
So I would like to open if any audience in the Webex, if you guys have any questions, you might turn on your microphone or just post it on the chat box. Just pick anyone. Questions?
Can you for how about the sleeping? Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just recommendations from the audience. So
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah, I think the Q&A session is over.
So, Alhamdulillah, I think the Q&A session is over. I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Dr. Muhammad Kabir Hassan once more for sharing his thoughts with us today with the webinar. So, with that ascertained, I'm pretty sure that everyone who joined us today, either in the face-to-face or in the Webex, has gained some knowledge from you, Professor. So, I'm Shiratul Irma. And I would like to thank everyone for coming today on behalf of AAGBS. And I would like to apologize for any technical issue throughout this webinar session. So thank you and have a good day, everyone. Assalamualaikum.
Salam.